after talking about the trans community's misogyny towards women in my last video, them promoting violence against women.
I'ma beat your I will. These hands do not discriminate. These hands do not discriminate. I will.
Them promoting violence against women, particularly radical feminists, and taking up women's spaces. Now I want to address the homophobia in the trans community, specifically lesbophobia. First, let's listen to the lovely things trans people say about lesbians.
Welcome back to Listen to Trans People, where that's all we do. I want to see cis become better toys so all the trans queens out there have a bunch of free bimbos to play with. Hooking up in a lesbian bar and my partner doesn't know I'm trans. When we get to their place and it's revealed, I don't give them the choice and break them into a girl loving lesbian. I continue to hate TERF lesbians. What else is new? I have a real issue with TERF lesbians who think they are better than other people. And the idea that they hate but their bodies would probably give in to a good and shamefully come makes me so horny. I feel like hate one would be hot because I have an actual reason to have something against them, making it more tempting to reduce them to just sleeves or pieces of meat that serve the purpose of making me come. Want to take a cis girl on a date, be really nice to her, we just look like a normal lesbian couple. She gets relaxed and sees me like any other girl. Then we go home and I act like a total creep, licking her all over, rubbing my on her, ignoring her growing discomfort knowing she won't say anything because she doesn't want to be transphobic.
One of the most homophobic actions by the trans community is them trying to convince everyone that homosexuality is a choice or a preference. Calling lesbians' attraction to the female body a mere genital preference erases the sheer violence behind the corrective essay of millions of lesbians. Lesbians don't just quote-unquote dislike male genitals, we are physically incapable of being attracted to it. Same-sex attraction is not a choice, it's a biological reality. Dismissal of same-sex attraction as a choice reinforces the homophobic ideology that attractions can be altered and paves the way for discrimination and conversion therapy of lesbians. The erasure of gay history is also a very common problem. Trans people stealing the credit for the activism of lesbians and gays in America during the 1960s. They always take the credit saying things like trans people gave you rights, which isn't true. A common lie they spread is that Marsha P. Johnson, an American gay rights activist, was a trans woman, which isn't true. Marsha P. Johnson was a drag queen, whose real name was Malcolm Michaels. Marsha was his drag name. He was not transgender. He said throughout his life that he was a man. And contrary to the lies being spread, he was not the one who led the Stonewall riots. He was 40 blocks away from the Stonewall bar when the riot started. Sylvia Rivera was also nowhere near the Stonewall at all that night. Marsha and Sylvia were not the catalysts or pioneers for gay liberation in America. The person who actually kickstarted the pushback against the police brutality against homosexuals, which led to the gay liberation movement, was Storm DeLarvery, a butch lesbian. It's so insulting and homophobic for trans people to claim that we wouldn't have rights if not for them. Meanwhile, they completely ignore the fact that the rest of us don't all live in the US and barely have any rights as homosexuals. Other than trying to erase homosexual American history, they're also trying to erase the word itself. I'm sure most of you must have come across trans people on the internet trying to redefine the definition of the word lesbian, saying that lesbians are quote-unquote non-men attracted to other non-men. The real definition of a lesbian is a woman who is romantically and sexually attracted to only other women. Lesbians are not and cannot be trans or non-binary. Here's why. Let's just pretend for a second that being non-binary is actually a real valid thing that makes sense. If a woman is a lesbian, suddenly calls herself non-binary, she would no longer be a lesbian. Because lesbians are women and this person has decided she's no longer a woman. The correct term for this person to use would be trixic or gynosexual. A lesbian is someone who is biologically female who is only attracted to other people who are biologically female. If gender is fluid, then it makes no sense to base sexuality off gender because it's always changing. Sex remains consistent. You can say lesbians are female-identifying individuals attracted to other female-identifying individuals, and then in the same breath say gender is fluid and ever-changing, and not realizing those two lines of thought completely contradict each other. Of course, a lesbian would never date a straight man or any man who's biologically male and has male features. So why would you want to date a trans woman who's biologically male and also has male features? It's honestly very sad how trans ideology is trying to convince so many young, impressionable lesbians into thinking they're men.
Now we're telling children that are probably confused, anxious, probably just little gay boys and little gay girls, that they're trapped in the wrong body.
Neoconversion therapy. A little girl is a tomboy. She likes to play with boys' toys. Oh! The parent says, maybe you're a little boy. And next thing you know, you're converting your little girl who just grew up to be a lesbian adult into a straight man. What better way to convert the gays?
Trans people pretty much just base gender off of stereotypes. Red femmes. Gender is a social construct. Lesbians and trans activists. Gender is a social construct. Red femmes. You are not identified by your sex. Trans activists. You are not identified as your sex. Red femmes, gender roles are harmful. Trans activists, gender roles are harmful. Red femmes. So abolish gender and understand that you are still your biological sex, even if you don't subscribe to the harmful gender roles. Trans activists, if you like boy things, you're a boy things, you're a boy. If you like girl things, you're a girl. Hashtag trans rights. It's also very misogynistic. Every day I see a woman post some variation of society treats women badly, so I don't feel like a woman, or I wish I wasn't born a woman, and instead of coming to the most obvious conclusion that this is a result of misogyny and internalizing that misogyny so bad to the point of not wanting to be a woman in work, they instead come to the most regressive and unproductive conclusion that it must mean they aren't actually women. Would it not be more productive to ask, why do I not want to be a woman? Why does society, specifically men, treat women badly in the first place? What can we do to change this? Instead of desperately trying to escape misogyny by saying, I'm not a woman, please don't treat me like one. Would you react with the same support if a person of color said, I wish I was born white? No? You would instantly recognize that that person has internalized racism. Why can't you do the same for those with internalized misogyny? Why is it problematic to talk about internalized misogyny, but not internalized racism? This woman shared a picture of what she wrote in her diary as a teenager, expressing how she didn't like the things that came with being a girl. Period pains, puberty, pregnancy scares, abortion, all normal things that girls all over the world struggle with. And because she said she wanted to be a boy instead, so she wouldn't have to go through all those struggles, trans activists started to say she's transgender even though she made it clear she's not. Completely missing her point. So many people are refusing to understand that most girls experience a disconnect or discomfort around our bodies at the time puberty begins. My observation is that nobody wants to accept this as a typical female experience because that means they'd have to admit to the fact that trans men do not experience more discontentment with womanhood than the average woman. Mask lesbians, butches, and studs are the most vulnerable to trans ideology. The trans community always assumes a butch or a stud wants to be a man, which is lesbophobic.
I do feel like I have to fight for my identity as a woman because I think people, especially nowadays, they kind of just assume that I'm going by like male pronouns or that I want to be known as a man or something like that. I find that I more often have to really hold on to the places and spaces where I am perceived as a woman.
Or they wonder why butch women are butch women, you know? Like, if you're a woman and you're butch, that must mean that you're transgendered or that you're trying to be a man.
Two sides of the same lesbophobic coin. Straight conservatives call masculine lesbians men as an insult. Now queers and trans people are also calling masculine lesbians men. We can't even have our own lesbian exclusive spaces without trans people trying to force themselves in. Circa 1991, a women-only, lesbian-organized music festival called Mishfest became the hotbed for controversy. Their crime? They told biological men they would not be allowed to attend the festival as it was a strictly female-only space. Do you know what those biological males did in response? Those men, and a few female supporters, created a decade-spanning protest of Mishfest. It wasn't a protest, it was a campaign of harassment and torment. The protesters harassed the women in attendance, intentionally invaded the campgrounds, sexually harassed and assaulted women, made flyers of women from porno maps with penises drawn on them stating that real women have penises. Forced Mitchfest to shut down in 2015 because they had lost too many financial sponsors due to harassment from trans activists. About a year after the festival was shut down, lead protester of Mitchfest and career trans activist Dana Rivers would go on to murder a lesbian couple and their son before setting their home on fire. Mitchfest hardly spanned 15 years before trans people learned about it and began invading female-only spaces and hurting lesbians. These are the terrible and evil things trans people do to lesbians, but we're supposedly the ones in the wrong for not wanting them in our spaces. The last thing I want to talk about on this topic for now is how trans people think masked lesbians, butches, and studs being confused for men in public bathrooms is transphobia. It's not at all. Masked lesbians could easily prove they're not men by just having a closer look at their faces and feminine features. I recommend watching this TED Talk titled, "A Lesbian Walks into a Bathroom, a Lesson on Code Switching." It talks about this issue in more detail. Also, fun fact, did you know there are countries where being homosexual is illegal, but being trans is perfectly legal? Like Iran, for example. Lesbophobia in the trans community is so bad that when we try to talk about it and bring attention to it in LGBT groups and communities online, we immediately get banned and we get dismissed as TERF. The trans and queer community normally says kinks at pride. Drag shows sexualizing women's bodies, making up more and more ridiculous pronouns, and all sorts of other things. The queer community doesn't seem to understand why this does more harm than good, and fortunately, lesbians will always be the ones who have to pay the price of their degeneracy. This whole thing is why gay people since the 1990s do not want to be grouped in with trans people, and why 94% of LGBT people don't want to be referred as LGBTQ.